listening to a lecture and then to be part of it. So there's been a bit of a confusion about this next stage of what we're doing, and for that I apologise. We thought there was a speaker, but there wasn't. What we've instituted in place is a very quick panel to discuss issues of open source in healthcare. So we're very lucky indeed to have some distinguished panelists in the audience today. David Riley, Sam Bowen, and Dr. Dan Russler, and recently arrived John Speakman.
Just for the record, I so 11:30, sorry about that. So if you want to give me a beat down now, now's the chance.
So what we thought we'd do is we'd start off with a very quick introduction as to your role and in open source, please, if that would be okay. David.
Sure. So my name's Dave Riley. For the past 15 years, I've been involved largely with community building exercises in the federal government. Started out with the Department of Defense, getting the three services to work together, and then decided to take on larger projects where we had more than just the DoD involved. So we got DoD and VA involved, and then in my most recent project, it involved 26 federal agencies, getting them to collaborate on a common strategy and a common investment in terms of building software, which was the Connect platform, which was implementing health information exchange standards and releasing that as open source. So what I'm doing now is, well, the vision from 4 years ago when we started that project was that we would develop the software as a joint investment, release it as open source, and then eventually evolve it out to a full open source community. So it's been one of those kind of hybrid monsters, if you will, because it's got all the preponderance of federal process and acquisition and the restrictions that kind of go with that, and yet the aspirations to really be an open source, open governance kind of model. So we're in the process of moving that out. So I left the government side of this thing and set up a nonprofit foundation to basically take on that project among others, and so that's where we are today.
I'm Dr. Sam Bowen. I'm an end user of open source software. I work in private practice about 60, 70 hours a week, and I'm the president of the OpenEMR Electronic Health Record Project. We specialize in very small organizations. We're probably best for practices of less than 15 physicians. So if you look at the United States, the great majority of physicians are in small practices, usually 5 physicians or less, and we consider that to be our strength. We're trying to make a difference and provide our software for free. We are having pretty much worldwide impact now.
Well, I went to medical school to be a country doctor, and but got infected during medical school with the Larry Weeds of the world and Clem McDonald's, who were publishing about the same time that I was going to medical school. So I've spent a career mixing kind of wearing a day hat, working for the likes of McKesson and Oracle, and also wearing a public development hat. And when I say public development hat, there's 3, I think, important areas of public development. One is standards development. So standards underlie, or should be underlying, much of the open source code that we write today. Number 2 is testing profiles. So integrating the healthcare enterprise and working in that space, which is kind of one step closer from standards to actually implementing code. And then the third area of public development is open source. And so one of my opportunities last year was to create a team that at the application level in open source at Oracle. And that's part of what I'll be talking about today is talking about that experience of working at open source at the application level, which I think is a first for Oracle at this point.
Hi everyone, I'm John. I'm with the National Cancer Institute, and for those of you who didn't hear the beatdown session yesterday evening at the social, I'm the Chief Program Officer for a part of the NCI called the Center for Biomedical Informatics and IT, and I run the NCI's informatics programs, the biggest and most public of which is CA Big, and Ian referred to that this morning, I did it yesterday. This is an open source development project that was characterized by somebody, I forget who, as you're not really open source, you're shareware, and I think that kind of gets to the heart of one of the issues we are having in that we have a robust open source license, everything we develop is open source, but and you can take it and mess with it and incorporate your own stuff and sell it and whatever without encumbrance, but you can't easily contribute back, and that's one of the things we are seeking the collective wisdom of you all to help us move towards. And I have to apologize, I have to step out in a couple of minutes for a call. I hope it won't last too long.
So if the audience would like to start thinking about questions they might ask this distinguished panel, I have one, if that's okay. And that is, you saw I put up a prediction at the end of my slide, which was that some of the quasi-open source systems like CABIG, I2B2, Profiles, RedCap, all of these are community-based systems. They're not truly open source, but they're not all especially thriving. I mean, they've got reasonable, I think all of them are reaching a somewhat of a plateau. What are your predictions for these types of systems in healthcare, or others that you are involved with? Is everything going to inevitably move towards open source, a full-featured open source like the Apache Foundation?
Yeah. Predicting the future isn't that fun. I was talking to a historian recently. He said, if you think predicting the future is hard, try to predict the past, you know. As history has been rewritten a number of times by the victors, so figuring out the real truth there is a challenge. It's a grand experiment. I mean, what we're doing, for example, with Connect right now, transitioning it from a government project that really wants to be open source, and we did have means for people to contribute back to it. What wasn't fully open was the actual governance structure, which was the priorities were being set by federal agencies who were funding it. And if private sector organizations could convince a federal agency that their need was actually matched the federal need, then things would get prioritized. So there was kind of a truce that we'd reached in terms of being able to get stuff outside of federal agencies into the code baseline, but it wasn't a representative governance kind of mechanism. And so in turning loose of that, the federal agencies fear that they're going to lose control, or they're not going to be able to keep commitments that they make. Federal agencies frequently get pinned down for delivery of functionality on a given schedule. Those schedules have no basis in actual fact in terms of what's possible and what's not. It's usually a political exigency. Some politician or representative leader stands up and boasts what we can or can't do. And so they make commitments on impossible timelines, and then the agency's expected to do that. So I think that we're at a critical junction to try to figure out a model to make these kinds of transitions work. Last night at the Birds of Feather, you know, it was obvious that people were like, well, you know, if you were starting with a new community and you'd grow it up and you'd do this and this, well, that's not the reality that we're faced with right now. We've got projects that have been going on for a while. Some have hundreds of millions of dollars invested in them potentially. So how do you transition that out and make a vibrant community out of it? We think we have some ideas, and we're trying to draw from what we consider best practices out there, but you know, will it work? I don't know, some of them will work, some of them won't, I don't think. And at this point, I think it's too early to tell which ones will succeed and which ones won't. But I can guarantee you that some of them will, because the need is there, and it's just a matter of figuring out how to address the need.
I think what we see in our project and what I've seen in other source projects that I've tracked over the years is you'll see individual developers who just get a hankering to do a particular little piece, and they go after it. But you kind of have to wait. If you have gaps that you need to fill, you just have to wait for somebody who has the need that want to fill that gap. And it's particularly difficult in a top-down structure to try to reverse that, because especially from our community, in the OpenEMR community, we have needs that are missing pieces in the software. A particular developer decides he likes that particular little project, he wants to take it on, and he starts writing the code. He gets on the forums and he announces he's going to do this project. Does anybody have a problem with it? Usually there's silence, which means nobody's going to object. And they go for it. And we try to prevent people, if possible, not to be working on the same pieces of code at the same time. But it means it's kind of slow and erratic and unpredictable. If you put an agenda on the top and say we have to have this module done by March 15th, the only way to get that done is to pour money on it and hire specific individuals to do that for you. And it doesn't work in the same kind of open source way. I think the advantages of open source is the quality of software tends to be very high, very few bugs. We saw some recent examples, a lecture in terms of what is the reliability of Linux versus Microsoft. What is the reliability of Apache versus IIS? And those kind of examples where the number of bugs found are dramatically lower, the operating uptime is dramatically higher with open source systems, and I think you're going to see that improved quality in your systems if you can get to the open source way of doing things. But that means you need a user base who they need to tell you what they want. That's going to be difficult.
You know, what's the future of open source? The question is number one, is will it fill a need? And you know, what are the needs in the U.S.? One is that I see open source as one of the opportunities for reawakening the U.S. IT expertise. With all the entry-level jobs going, you know, overseas by and large, you know, we have few students that are really able to go out and find some place to you know, grow into middle management, senior management. And open source offers the opportunity for small business to join the game with the big guys. And of course, you know, I think I mentioned that last night, what does open source do? It raises the bar for market entry. And not only that, but it makes it possible for small businesses to join that raised bar. And it turns out then that, you know, open source is the common denominator, and then people differentiate based, you know, on service or extra features or whatever. So I don't see that, you know, offshore programming is going to meet the needs of physicians and optimum GUI design for physicians, for example. So that's a wonderful place for open source to really show what it can do. And so that's one of the areas I'm real excited about, seeing what it can do, and hope that the community can get together and do that.
Yeah, so we'll to see that. I echo basically what Dave said, that you know, after his depressing litany of how government contracting works, which is unfortunately true, I didn't clear my throat, but but it's got to work because there's a need, and I think the need is in our case very clearly defined. I think one of the great questions that I got asked last night is, what is exactly the problem you're trying to solve, and you know, and make sure that that is a problem that really something like open source is suited for solving. And I think a crisper answer than I gave on the spot last night is, we're trying to solve the problem of collaboration as the not just in engineering, as the boundaries, and this is something of what you heard from Iain this morning, between healthcare and life sciences blur, and the requirement is for information to move between them. You can't scale a big government operation up to that. There's too many turf wars, there's too many competing interests. A way to make it scale is to outsource it beyond the government to an open source community. And the one other thing I was going to say is, certainly in our case, we have a lot of basically offshore folks or out of the United States folks who want to contribute, and you know, they're not fazed by the fact that it's not going to get paid necessarily.